Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. New York is in many ways the most glamorous of cities, but it can also be a very tough town in which to live. And one of the toughest tasks, if you're not wealthy, is finding an affordable place to live. We'll talk about a dramatic new effort to make that task a little easier with my guest, the chairman of the New York City Planning Commission, Carl Weisbrod. Carl, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Good to be here, Bob.
Thanks for coming in. So even as we're sitting here, the City Council is in the process of considering approval of a signature proposal by Mayor de Blasio that would take any development in which there's going to be an expansion of housing in the city and require that a certain portion of that housing be permanently affordable.
That's absolutely correct. And it's one part of a very broad, probably the most comprehensive housing program of any municipality ever. And I'm including in that the path-breaking and really pioneering housing program that Mayor Koch did back in the 1980s. This is really a major effort to address, as you said, probably one of the most serious problems of our time, which is affordable housing for our population.
Now, this program has a terrible title, so can we just get that out of the way?
Well, we actually have two proposals now pending before the City Council. One is called Mandatory Inclusionary Housing, MIH for short. The other is called Zoning for Quality and Affordability, as we affectionately call it, ZQA for short. And both of these are designed not only to expand and assure a certain amount of affordable housing for people who need affordable housing, but also to improve the quality of housing wherever we can.
Now, in a city that's starved for housing, this would seem to be, on the surface, a good idea, but there's a lot of opposition. Where's the opposition coming from?
Well, I don't think anything of this breadth, and certainly when it comes to land use and zoning, is ever uncontroversial. It is the nature of the pluralistic society we live in. But on mandatory inclusionary housing, there have been issues on, I think almost everybody embraces the idea of it, and there have been issues about whether we are affordable enough, are we requiring deep enough affordability? And on the other side, there are people who say that affordable levels should be even higher, that we should embrace more middle-class people as well. So we hear it from both sides, but I'd also like to say that this particular element of the mayor's program establishes just a floor for affordability, a required amount of affordable housing at a required level of affordability. And because the city is now allocated $8.2 billion, which is twice as much as was allocated in the previous 10 years, we have the ability to drive affordability both deeper and broader. So that's what we're planning to do.
So the housing situation in New York City is truly terrible. There's 8 million residents. Most of those residents are members of moderate or lower income families, frankly. So when you think in terms of the housing landscape, what does it look like to folks like that?
Well, just stepping back a moment, 56% of New York City renters are rent burdened. That means that they are spending more than a third of their gross income on rent. And New York, as you know, is a rental city for the most part. 2/3 of New York households rent their apartments. They don't own. So right there, you see the breadth of the problem. But then beyond that, we have a need. We have about a need for 900,000 units of housing for those who are very poor or extremely poor. And we only have 400,000 units that can accommodate that population. So right there's a gap of 500,000 units that we have to create. The mayor's Mayor's proposal is to build over the next, or preserve over the next 10 years, 200,000 units of housing, 80,000 new units of affordable housing, 120,000 units of preserved affordable housing. And this is largely, I think, because the federal government over many decades now has not been stepping up as we would hope it would, and as it used to in the 60s and 70s, and certainly in the New Deal era. And we need that kind of help, and absent that support from Washington, we really are required to use our own resources.
So if we're talking about 80,000 new affordable units, this is over what period of time?
10 years.
All right, over 10 years.
Of new units, right.
New affordable units, right, over 10 years. Give us a sense of the income range of the families who would benefit from those 80,000 new units.
So we're quadrupling the allocation of units going to the extremely poor, and that is for people, and very poor, that is for families that are earning, family of three, earning under $23,000 for a family of three. We are increasing.
But that's not part of this new program.
It's part of, it's definitely part of the new program of the mayors, but not the income limits in mandatory inclusionary housing.
Not these new units that we're talking about where the developers are required to provide affordable housing. They're not required to provide affordable housing for very poor families, are they?
What mandatory inclusionary housing requires is that they can either set aside 25% of their units at a level of $46,000 for a family of three.
This is moderate income.
For low moderate, or 30% of their units for those earning about $60,000 for a
Even
family
more moderate.
of three. However, that's the average. So there will be some families within that range that will be above the average, many families in that range that will be below the average. But then beyond that, the city will use, and is committed to using, its $8.2 billion in subsidy to drive the income affordability even lower. So with subsidy, we will reach families that earn a lot less than the $46,000. That's the minimum that a developer would have to provide. So we're setting a floor, we're not setting a ceiling. We're setting a floor of what the developers would have to do, and then beyond that, we're using our quite extensive subsidy dollars to drive rents even further.
Among the fears that I've heard voiced is that because most of these new units going forward are going to be luxury units, that this is just another form of gentrification, and that even though some units will be set aside for so-called affordable housing, it will have the net effect of driving people from their homes. And people are basing this on what they've seen with gentrification, that prices go up in the neighborhood, that a lot of small businesses are forced out because of increasing rents and that sort of thing. Is this a legitimate fear?
Well, let's talk about what's happening now. This is what's happening now all over the city without any requirements whatsoever. Yes. People are being displaced. Rents are going up. We don't have the kind of rent controls, rent stabilization that we'd like in the city, that we have pressed for in Albany. So we're seeing, as our housing market tightens, that in fact rents are going up and people are getting displaced. This is going to create more units, more affordable units. It's not going to increase displacement. It's going to reduce displacement by providing more affordable housing than we could otherwise provide by requiring developers to help pay for it. And that's a big change. This is by far the most rigorous such program in the entire country. So yes, there's displacement going on, and we've greatly enhanced through our housing department our anti-displacement tools. But The market is very, very strong, and the only way we're going to be able to deal with it is to build housing that is affordable to some. Some market rate housing is needed as well. We need more housing generally, but this is going to reduce the impact on displacement, not increase it.
Now, you've had a lot of local community organizations and I believe borough boards and that sort of thing who have come out against the plan. Their contention is that the requirements don't go low enough. Is that correct? In other words, so not enough really low-income people will benefit from this program. Is there much that can be done about this? In other words, is it possible to have this kind of program where you really set aside significant numbers of units for very low-income people?
Well, I think we're trying here we're first creating a program that's citywide in its applicability. And what we're trying to do is balance what we can rightly expect from the private market and what we as the city have to do ourselves, and do both. This is mandatory, so that if we demand too much in terms of just pure economics, a private property owner is not going to build at all, because there's no interest in the private property owner making some profit. They're not going to build. If we demand too little, that means we're going to have to use more public resources. So we're trying to get it just right and use both public resources and the private market and achieve as much as we can achieve. Are we going to totally close the gap in what we need for our citizens over the next 10 years? We're not. We need more help from Washington. We need more help from Albany. We need help generally in order to do that if the market stays strong. We're a city that's always growing, and that's a good thing about New York. We welcome people from all over. And what we're seeing in New York now is our population's at an all-time high. We have 50,000 people today in homeless shelters. That's totally unacceptable in a civilized society. So we have to do all we can, and I think we are, through our actions and through what we're currently paying for, doing that. And I should say one other thing that's created a lot of controversy, and that is our companion legislation, which would reduce required parking for affordable senior citizen centers or senior citizen housing, or to provide slightly higher height limits only for providing affordable housing. This has also been a matter of great controversy because, in fact, our studies show that people who live in affordable senior housing, for the most part, don't have cars, don't use cars. These parking lots stay largely empty, and we're paying now $50,000 for a parking space when 3 parking spaces is the equivalent of providing 2 affordable housing units. So this has also been somewhat controversial, and another aspect of what we're trying to do here.
What are the implications for a city the size of New York? So you have 8 million residents, but you have a majority of New York's residents who can't afford the prevailing rent in a city of renters. Can't afford the rent in the apartments that are available to them. Long term, what are the implications of that? How is that sustainable?
Well, I think this is the very thing that Mayor de Blasio got elected on. We don't want to see a city of 2 separate cities, one rich and one poor. And we don't want to see a city that becomes just a haven for the rich. We see other cities in the United States that have done that, and that's not the ethos of New York. It's not the culture of New York. So the only way we really can address this is to build in New York, and that's always complicated because neighborhoods are very wary of development generally, and also allocate as much of our public resources as we possibly can to address this challenge and subsidize the cost of building housing, which is what we're doing. So again, we're spending twice as much as was spent in the previous 10 years on this, We're spending, fortunately, the city's doing very well right now. Our economy's doing well. We can afford to do it. We have to do it. And literally 10% of our entire capital budget is going to affordable housing.
But it seems bizarre to me if the majority of the people need so-called affordable housing, our only real response seems to be to build more and more housing for the very rich and then give a small portion of that housing to lower income or moderate income families. But that, that seems crazy to me. If the only way we can answer the housing needs of moderate income families is to build new housing for the very rich, that seems nuts, doesn't it?
Well, but that's not what we're doing. I'll take an example of East New York, where we're looking at expanding housing opportunities in East New York. What we're doing in East New York is that we've pledged that of the first 1,200 units that get built in East New York, which are on sites that the public either controls or is controlled by not-for-profit organizations that build affordable housing, all 1,200 of those units are going to be affordable. Any project that the city puts money into in East New York is going to be affordable, and at income levels that are well below the 60% of AMI, or the 46,000 for a family of three, that developers are required to meet.
But that's only part of a program that, in fact, is primarily about housing for the rich. Is it at all possible to put the rich aside momentarily? I know it's a radical suggestion, but just put them aside momentarily. Right. Is there any possible way to just build affordable housing for moderate and low-income New Yorkers?
Well, we can't actually stop people from building. We're not subsidizing the rich. We're not putting any money into rich people's housing. And in fact, what we've done is totally proposed and got passed in the legislature a total revamping of our tax abatement programs so that they skew and require a certain amount of housing to be spent.
But my question is, can we get past that? So we're going to require that a certain percentage be made affordable. But I'm saying, hypothetically at least, is it possible to just push all of that aside and say, you know what, we're not going to think right now in terms of housing for the very wealthy. We're only going to think in terms of housing for moderate and low-income families. Is it impossible to devise a program that would only build at least one program that would build just that kind of housing, not housing for the rich?
Yes, and we are doing that. We're not going to have a program that prevents any market rate housing from being built because we need more housing generally. But
we need more housing for the rich.
We need more housing generally.
But do we need more housing for the rich?
We need more housing for the market, and it's not just for the rich. It's for the middle class as well. But anytime the city's putting its own dollars into projects like in East New York, those projects are going to be 100% affordable housing in East New York when we put our dollars into it. We're not putting a moratorium on housing.
But we're putting our dollars into a project that overall will actually provide more housing for the wealthy, right?
No, just again to go back.
I don't mean that the city's dollars are going to be used for that, but I'm saying that the dollars are part of a project that in fact includes.
In East New York, when we are putting our dollars into a project in East New York, those projects will be 100% affordable.
And affordable in this case means?
It could be at a variety of different levels, 60,000 and below. A good chunk of it is going to be below $33,000 for a family of three.
Is New York a case where, since there is such a demand for affordable housing, but that demand is not being met, is this a case of the free market not working?
Well, I think that the free market in housing has not worked very, very well in a place where the demand is high in a city like New York, and where zoning restrictions actually, to some extent, restrict supply. Now, in a city like ours, we want to see more housing for people, and clearly, you can't build today in the Northeast and most urban centers, probably all urban centers. You can't build housing that is affordable without public support, public dollars. This can't be done. Land costs are too high. Cost of construction is too high. Those two factors alone, without some sort of public support, really take the cost of housing outside the ability of many, many people to pay. And that's really the tragedy. And unless land costs come down, which they haven't because we don't manufacture land, it's going to be hard.
And a city does not have those public dollars you're talking about to invest in affordable housing.
We don't have enough, but we are.
So if the federal government does not step up, does that mean that there's just flat no answer to the housing problems in New York City?
Well, it would certainly be helpful if the federal government stepped up.
But you don't see this occurring, I don't think.
I don't think so. We haven't seen it. And frankly, this has been an issue with both parties. We have, whether in the last 30 years, 40 years, we have just not seen a great enhancement of commitment to housing on the part of the federal government. That said, New York City is spending more for affordable housing than I believe the next 50 cities in the United States combined. So we are really putting our money where our mouth is. Is it enough? No, because the need is so great. And in part, it's because we are a welcoming city. We are a city that's, crime is low, so people are continuing to live here. They're not leaving when their children reach school age. We continue to attract people from all over the world, people of talent, and many of them are not wealthy most of them are not wealthy when they come here. That has contributed to a dynamic economy, but we don't shut our borders the way some cities do, and as a consequence, our population is now higher than it's ever been. Our need for housing is greater than it's ever been, and our ability to do it is greater, but it's not fully meeting the need we have.
We only have about a minute left. I think one of the most outrageous things in all of New York is the so-called poor door phenomenon, and this is a case where in a particular housing development, you'll have market rate rents or market rate units where the people who have those units enter through the front door. And then there's a separate poor door for people whose rents are subsidized.
That is no more.
Does that not occur in New York at all anymore?
It had in the past, and under mandatory inclusionary housing, that will no longer be allowed. Under
mandatory inclusionary housing, but in private in private units
we're not allowing it in anything that we put public dollars in.
But I mean, no. My point is that if, let's say, a private developer builds a house, so you wouldn't have market rate, or you wouldn't have lower income families there if there weren't public dollars going into it. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying if public dollars are going into a project, and it has market rate units and public and subsidized units, there is no poor door anymore. We've stopped it.
And then
it's over.
Very quickly, I mentioned that the city council is considering the mayor's new plan. Do you expect it to pass?
I'm hopeful. I think we went through 2 days of very intensive hearings at the council last week. I think it was at a very high level. Council members' questions were very, very good, very constructive. I'm sure they're going to want to make some changes. We're receptive to working with them, so I'm optimistic.
Great. Carl, thank you so much. Carl Weisbrod, Chairman of the City Planning Commission. We'll be back in a moment with a final word. We've heard a lot lately about wealth and income inequality. Now comes the study that raises the inequality stakes to a tragic new level. High-income Americans live a lot longer than their poorer counterparts. For men born in the early decades of the 20th century, there was about a 6-year difference in the life expectancy of those in the top 10% of earners compared to those in the bottom 10%. In other words, the rich in those cases could expect to live about 6 years longer. Recent data show that that difference has grown dramatically, with men in the top 10% living about 14 years longer than those in the bottom 10%. That's nearly a full decade and a half. I've always wondered why ordinary people in a free country like the United States put up with the grotesque economic and social disparities imposed upon them by the very rich and their craven acolytes in government. Now we see that long years of human life itself are being sacrificed on the altars of great wealth. That people are so passive in the face of this kind of unfairness remains puzzling to me. If we'll put up with this, the odds are we'll put up with anything. That's all for now. See you next time.